The galaxy had witnessed the lesson of the Zan Collective. The images spread to every corner of known space. Every empire, every council, every warlord watched as humanity's fleet appeared above Zathro's prime like a swarm of dark stars, disabled an entire civilization without firing a single shot, and then vanished back into the void. For 2 years, the galaxy was quiet. The old rule held firm once more. Sol systems sat alone in space, silent and untouched. Ships rerouted their paths by light years to avoid even passing near Earth's direction. Traders updated their maps. Parents told their children the story of the Zan, not as a myth, but as a warning written in living memory. For 2 years, no one dared. Then came the Vreth. The Iron Empire. The Vreth were unlike any species the galaxy had seen before. Where the Zan were elegant and proud, the Vreth were brutal and absolute. Their homeworld, Vrethka, was a planet of iron and fire, its surface scarred by millennia of war. They had no oceans, no forests, no softness of any kind. Everything on Vrethka was hard, sharp, and built to endure. The Vreth themselves reflected their world. Massive creatures, nearly 3 meters tall, with armoured skin like black stone, and 4 eyes that glowed deep red in the dark. They did not walk, they marched. They did not speak, they declared. Their empire had been built not through diplomacy or trade, but through a simple philosophy that had never failed them. Everything breaks, everything bleeds, everything bows. For 3,000 years, the Vreth Iron Empire had expanded without pause, 800 star systems under their control, trillions of citizens living under iron law, hundreds of species conquered and absorbed into their machine of war. They had faced every kind of resistance the galaxy could offer, and crushed it all. When the story of the Zan reached Vrethka, the Iron Council did not feel fear, they felt opportunity. The Iron Council. The council chamber on Vrethka was nothing like the crystal elegance of the Zan's tower. It was a hall carved from the planet's volcanic rock, lit by rivers of lava flowing beneath glass floors. The walls were covered in the trophies of conquered species. Weapons, armour, flags, skulls. Every chair was a throne. Every throne was a weapon. Iron Marshal Grath stood at the centre, studying the recordings from Zathro's prime on a massive display screen. He watched the human fleet appear. He watched the Zan defences fail. He watched Commander Kane deliver his warning. He watched it 3 times. Then he smiled. A slow, terrible smile that made the soldiers around him step back. They announced themselves, he said. His second commander, War Chief Dara, tilted her head. Marshal? The humans. They appeared above Zathro's prime. They showed their ships. They gave a speech. Grath turned from the screen, his red eyes burning. That is not what an unstoppable force does. That is what a species does when it wants to avoid a fight. Dara was quiet for a moment. Or when it wants to give mercy. Mercy. Grath said the word like it tasted of poison. Mercy is what the weak offer when they are afraid to finish what they started. The Zan were soft. They built ships for show. We build ships for war. He moved to the display, pointing at the human fleet frozen in the recording. Look at how few there are. Thousands of ships, yes, but we have millions. The Zan had 200 ships, and the Zan were fools who announced their attack months in advance. Grath cut her off. We will not make the same mistake. We will not send a scouting fleet. We will not issue demands. We will not give speeches. He turned to face the full council, his voice rising to fill the volcanic chamber. We will hit them with everything, all at once. No warning, no mercy, no second chances. The council chamber erupted in roars of approval. Only one voice did not join the chorus. High Historian Vex, the oldest member of the Iron Council, sat motionless in the corner. His armoured skin had faded from black to grey with age. His red eyes had dimmed to a dull ember. He had lived long enough to remember things others had forgotten. Marshal Grath, he said, his voice quiet but carrying across the chamber. I have read every record we possess of humanity. Not the recent ones, the old ones, the ones carved in stone before we had writing. Grath turned to him slowly. And our ancestors encountered humans once, 4,000 years ago, before the Iron Empire existed, before we had star travel. They came to our system in a single ship. Vex paused. One ship. They spoke to our ancestor chiefs through a device that translated their words into our language. They said only this: "We know you will one day reach the stars. When that day comes, remember this boundary." The chamber was silent. "They gave us coordinates," Vex continued, "the boundary of Sol system. And then they left. We never saw them again." He looked directly at Grath. "Our ancestors were not fools, Marshal. They were the most fearless warriors our species ever produced. They fought gods and won. But every elder who heard those humans agreed without argument. They marked those coordinates as forbidden and never spoke of them again." Grath stared at him for a long moment. Then he laughed. "A story," he said. "A 4,000-year-old story from ancestors who had never left their own atmosphere." He waved his hand dismissively. "We have 1,000,000 ships, Vex. We have weapons that can split planets. We have soldiers who have never known defeat." His eyes swept the council. "Prepare the fleet. All of it. Every ship, every weapon, every soldier we have. We launch in 30 days. Vex bowed his head slowly. He did not argue further. He simply began to pray. The fleet of iron. 30 days later, what emerged from Vrethka's orbital stations was not a fleet. It was an armada. 1,200,000 warships. The largest military force ever assembled in the history of the known galaxy. Ships so numerous they blocked the light of Vrethka's sun as they formed up in orbit. Carriers the size of small moons. Dreadnoughts with weapons that had cracked planetary crusts. Fighter swarms numbering in the billions. Iron Marshal Grath stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Vrethka Eternal, a vessel so massive it generated its own gravity. He looked at the assembled might of his empire through the bridge's vast windows and felt something close to joy. No one could stop this. Not the Zan, not ancient warnings, not sleeping myths. "Set course for Sol," he commanded. The armada moved. Across the galaxy, those who had instruments sensitive enough to detect the Vreth fleet's departure watched in horror. Emergency transmissions flew between empires. The Velon Union sealed every border and powered their deepest shelters. The Etherian archivists did something they had never done before. They transmitted a direct warning to Sol system, a single encoded pulse aimed at Earth. "The Vreth are coming. 1,000,000 ships. We are sorry." The Watchers see deep beneath Earth's surface. In the Sentinel Command Center, the alert came in quietly. Not with alarms or flashing lights, but with a soft tone, the kind used to deliver important information without causing panic. Commander Marcus Kane was in the middle of a meal, something he rarely had time for, when his second, Commander Yael Chen, appeared at the entrance to his private quarters. "Sir," she said, "you should see this." He followed her to the main operations room, a vast circular chamber with screens covering every wall. Hundreds of Sentinel analysts worked at their stations, tracking the galaxy's movements with instruments humanity had built over millennia. On the central screen, a red mass was moving through space, moving towards Sol. Kane studied it for a long moment. He had seen large fleets before. He had studied the histories, every empire that had ever risen and fallen, every battle ever recorded. He had never seen anything like this. "How many?" he asked quietly. "Current estimate is 1.2 million vessels," Chen said. "We're still counting. They're coming in such numbers that our long-range sensors are struggling to separate individual ships." "Time to Sol boundary?" "At their current speed, 18 days. Kane was silent for several seconds. Around him, the analysts worked without speaking. Every person in that room understood what they were looking at. This was not a scouting mission. This was not a show of force. This was an extinction attempt. "Send word to the deep stations," Kane said finally. "Wake everyone, every sentinel, every watcher, every guardian." He turned to face Chen, his expression carved from stone. "The Vreth want war. We will give them understanding." Chen hesitated. "Sir, our standard protocols berat me the warning, the demonstration." "I read their marshal's broadcast," Kane said. "He called our mercy weakness. He called our warning a sign of fear." He looked back at the red mass on the screen. The Zan needed to be taught with a gentle hand. The Vreth have decided they are beyond teaching. He walked slowly to the center of the room, looking up at the screen. There will be no warning transmission this time. No face on a screen. No speech about mercy. He paused. They will simply encounter the truth. 18 days. The Vreth Armada travelled through space like an iron tide. Every planet they passed, every station they detected, went dark and silent at their approach. Word had spread ahead of them. Even species with no love for Earth had scrambled out of the Armada's path. The Vreth moved through an empty galaxy, their path cleared by the fear they inspired. Iron Marshal Grath walked his flagship's corridors daily, inspecting his forces, reviewing tactical plans, preparing for every scenario his military minds could imagine. He had planned for human ships appearing from hiding places. He had planned for unusual weapons, for electronic intrusion attempts, for psychological tactics. He had planned for every trick the Zan encounter had revealed. What he had not planned for was silence. On the 17th day of travel, the Armada crossed the outer boundary of Sol system. Nothing happened. No voice in their heads. No ancient ship powering up from behind a moon. No fleet emerging from the shadows of planets. Just the cold silence of space and the distant glow of a yellow star. On the bridge of the Vrethka Eternal, Grath's war chiefs exchanged uncertain glances. "Scanners?" Grath demanded. "Clear, Marshal. We detect debris from old human satellites, some asteroid fields, planetary signatures, but no ships, no weapons, no life signs beyond basic microbial readings on a few worlds." Grath allowed himself a slow smile. "You see," he said, "the Zan were frightened by a single old ship and a handful of hidden vessels. A show, a performance for the weak-minded." He turned to his fleet commanders on the communication screens. "All ships, advance. We move to Earth." The Armada pushed deeper into Sol. They passed Neptune. Nothing. They passed Uranus. Nothing. Saturn's rings sparkled silently around them as 1,000,000 ships moved through without resistance. On the bridge, young Vreth soldiers began to relax. Some were almost disappointed. They had prepared for war and found only emptiness. Then they reached Jupiter, and Jupiter moved. What was always there? It did not move like a planet shifts in its orbit. It moved like something waking up. The massive gas giant, largest in the Sol system, seemed to breathe. Its swirling storms changed pattern, rotating faster, then organising into geometric shapes impossible in nature. The Great Red Spot, a storm that had raged for centuries, flattened and spread until it covered half the planet's visible surface. Every scanner in the Vreth Armada went wild. "What?" a bridge officer started. Then Jupiter split open. Not violently, not explosively. The planet simply opened. Its upper atmospheric layers parted like a curtain being drawn back, revealing something within that should not have been possible. A structure, impossibly vast, built within the planet itself, hidden beneath centuries of storms and gas. It had no right angles, no familiar geometry. It was made of something that was not metal and not stone and not any material the Vreth had ever encountered. It glowed with a light that seemed to come from between the spaces of things rather than from any power source, and it was waking up. Grath stared at the screen. For the first time in 30 years of military command, he felt something he had not felt since childhood. He felt small. "Marshal," his chief scanner officer whispered, her voice stripped of all military discipline. I'm reading energy signatures from that structure that are... The numbers don't make sense. They don't fit in our measurement systems. It's like trying to measure an ocean with a teacup." More structures were appearing now. Not just in Jupiter, in Saturn. In the rings themselves, the ice and rock suddenly shifting, revealing dark shapes that had been camouflaged within the orbital debris for God knew how many years. In the asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter, thousands of shapes uncloaking at once, massive and silent. Humanity had not been hiding in their ships. Humanity had been hiding in their solar system. Every planet, every moon, every asteroid field. Infrastructure hidden in plain sight for centuries. Millennia, perhaps. Not a fleet waiting in the dark. An entire civilization built into the bones of Sol itself. And it was all coming online simultaneously. "Sir," War Chief Dara said softly, "we have made a mistake." Grath could not speak. Across the Armada, 1.2 million ships fell completely silent. Soldiers who had never shown fear in battle pressed against their viewports, staring at the impossible scale of what was emerging from hiding. A structure on Jupiter alone was larger than their entire homeworld, and there were hundreds of such structures. The humans had not been sleeping, they had been building. The voice that needed no transmission. It did not come through their communication systems. It did not come as a voice in their heads. It came as a certainty, a direct knowledge that arrived in every Vreth mind simultaneously, from the marshal to the lowest engine crew member, as simply and completely as the knowledge of one's own name. You chose this. No anger in it. No threat. Just fact, delivered with the weight of absolute truth. We observed your counsel. We heard your marshal's words. We know your intentions. Grath tried to speak. Found he could not. Every Vreth on every ship was frozen, not by any external force, but by the sheer presence that had entered their consciousness. The Zan received a warning because they came in ignorance. They did not know what we were. You came in knowledge. You watched what happened to the Zan. You called our mercy weakness. You called our warning a sign of fear. You prepared for everything we showed the Zan. You did not prepare for what we truly are. The Jupiter structure fully activated. There was no beam, no explosion, no dramatic display of weaponry. The nearest 10,000 Vreth ships simply ceased to exist. Not destroyed, not vaporized. They were there and then they were not there, as completely and quietly as a thought leaving a mind. No debris, no energy signature, no final transmission. Just absence where presence had been. The remaining ships of the Armada held their position in frozen silence. This is not a weapon. This is a reminder. You have 1,190,000 ships remaining. A pause that lasted exactly long enough for every Vreth soldier to truly understand what had just happened. Marshal Grath. Grath felt his name like a physical thing in his mind. Your ancestor chiefs heard our warning 4,000 years ago and were wise enough to obey it. You had their courage but not their wisdom. That is the difference between strength and arrogance. Another pause. Your High Historian Vex tried to warn you. He remembered what your ancestors understood. You did not listen. That is your failure, not theirs. Grath found his voice. It came out as barely a whisper. What are you? The answer arrived not as words but as a glimpse. A fraction of a second of direct knowledge, more information than a Vreth mind could hold, a flicker of what humanity had become, across 10,000 years of isolation and development. Every Vreth who experienced it would spend the rest of their lives unable to fully describe it. The closest any of them came was this. Imagine you are a child's drawing of a person, and you meet a person, and for one moment you understand the difference. The terms. When the presence spoke again, it was gentler. Not soft, nothing about it was soft, but no longer the absolute weight of before. You will leave, all of you, now. Your ships will be returned to you functional. Your crews are unharmed. You will carry these terms back to Vrethka. 1. The Iron Empire will dismantle 1/3 of its military fleet within 1 year. You will provide evidence of this dismantlement. 2. High Historian Vex will be given full authority over all decisions regarding Sol System and humanity. His word on this matter is final and absolute. 3. The Vreth will become keepers of the warning. You will spread the true history of this encounter to every empire you contact, not as propaganda, not as threat, but as honest record. These are not requests. These are the terms of your continued existence. If the terms are not met, the Jupiter structure pulsed once gently, almost like a heartbeat. We will not send another message. The presence withdrew. It was like having the sun go behind a cloud. The absence of it felt physical. On the bridge of the Vrethka Eternal, Iron Marshal Grath sat in his command throne, motionless, staring at a screen that showed 1.2 million ships surrounded by structures that made them look like dust motes in a cathedral. Around him, his officers were silent. War Chief Dara spoke first. Her voice was very quiet. Marshal, your orders. Grath was silent for a long time. He thought of his ancestors, who had heard a warning from a single ship and obeyed without question. He thought of High Historian Vex, who had tried to tell him. He thought of 10,000 ships that no longer existed, and the crews aboard them who had followed his orders and paid the price. Turn us around, he said finally. No one in the room spoke. No one celebrated. No one argued. They simply turned around. All 1,190,000 ships the greatest armada ever assembled in galactic history, turned away from Earth and began the long journey home. The return. The journey back to Vrethka was the longest of Grath's life. He did not sleep. He barely ate. He spent the days in the ship's archive reading, not tactical reports, not military histories, the old records, the ones Vex had mentioned, carved in stone before his people had writing. He had copies made from the historical archives. He read them slowly, word by word, letting each one settle. His ancestors had met humans before the stars, humans who had known even then that the Vreth would one day reach space, who had travelled across the galaxy to deliver one warning, in person, to a species still living in caves. Why, that question stayed with him. Why bother? Why not simply ignore them? Why spend the resources to visit a pre-spaceflight civilization just to say, this area is forbidden? He turned the question over for days. The answer, when it came to him, arrived not with triumph but with something close to shame, because they did not want to have to do what they had just done. The humans had tried to prevent this encounter from ever happening. They had gone to the Vreth when the Vreth were young and harmless, and could be warned without consequence. They had hoped the warning would pass down through generations and hold. It almost had. For 4,000 years it had held, and then he had thrown it away. When Vrethka appeared on the view screen, Grath stood up from his throne for the first time in days. He was a different creature than the one who had left. Not broken, the Vreth did not break, but changed in some fundamental way that he lacked the words to describe. "Hail, High Historian Vex," he said. Tell him the Marshal requests his counsel." His communications officer looked at him with something like surprise. An Iron Marshal requesting counsel rather than commanding it was unheard of. "Yes, Marshal," she said quietly, and opened the channel. The galaxy watches again. The recordings from the Vreth Armada's approach to Sol were incomplete. The instruments that might have captured what happened near Jupiter had simply stopped functioning during the event. There were no images of the structures activating, no recordings of the 10,000 ships disappearing. What the galaxy received were the testimonies of 1,190,000 returning ships and their crews, all of whom had experienced the same thing, all of whom told the same story with the same details, and all of whom had the same look in their eyes when they told it. Not fear, not quite, something older than fear, something that, in most species' languages, translated roughly as awe. The effect on the galaxy was immediate and total. Every military expansion program was quietly suspended. 3 ongoing wars ended within weeks, their combatants suddenly finding negotiation more appealing than conflict. The oldest empires opened their sealed archives and began sharing records they had kept hidden for centuries, as if a collective decision had been reached that there were more important things to guard than secrets. The Velen Union established what they called the Sol Compact, a formal agreement between 40 civilizations to maintain and enforce the old warning. Not from fear alone, but from what the Vreth soldiers' testimonies called understanding. The Etherian archivist did something unprecedented. They transmitted a message directly to Sol system, aimed at Earth, openly and without encoding. It said simply, "We are grateful you are patient with us. We will try to be worthy of that patience." Beneath the surface. In the Sentinel Command Center, Kane read the Etherian message twice. He was quiet for a long time. Chen stood nearby watching him. "Think they mean it?" she asked. "Some of them do," he said. He set down the transmission and looked at the screen showing Sol system, peaceful and quiet. Jupiter's surface had returned to its familiar swirl of clouds, as if nothing had ever been hidden within it, as if nothing was still hidden within it. "The Vreth are implementing the terms," Chen reported. "Vex has been given authority. Fleet dismantlement has begun. They're spreading the record of what happened." She paused. "All 3 terms within 30 days. Fastest compliance we've seen." "The Vreth are many things," Kane said. "But when they understand something, they commit to it completely." He walked to the window, the same window where he had stood after the Zan encounter, looking out at the stars. "How long will it hold this time?" Chen asked. He considered the question seriously. "Longer," he said finally. "The Zan taught the galaxy we exist. The Vreth taught them what that means." He turned from the window. "Eventually another will come. They always do. Some young empire that has decided it is the exception to every rule that ever was. He almost smiled. And we will be here. And if they don't stop, the almost smile faded. Then the galaxy will have one fewer empire, he said, and one more lesson. He looked back at the stars, at the hidden structures, and the silent watchers, and the ancient patience that humanity had built in the darkness while the rest of the galaxy rose and fell, and rose again. We are not monsters, he said quietly. We are not gods. We are simply a species that chose to stop fighting for territory and start fighting for peace. He paused. It turns out those are very different things. The first one never ends. The second one you have to be willing to do anything to protect. Outside, the stars burned on. Sul was quiet. The watchers watched. And the galaxy, slowly, haltingly, imperfectly, began to learn. Welcome to HFY Galactic Tale. Today, part 2. Came of this story, every galaxy knew the rule: never wake the humans. Until one alien empire did. Let's start.